So spiritually, what happens in evangelism? At least hopefully, what happens?
You become a Christian.
All right, new baby Christians are born. Do those new baby Christians know how to organize themselves into a church and how to reproduce what they just heard?
Mm-hmm.
No, probably not. And so that's why evangelism by itself is not enough to spark a church planting movement. What about a revival of existing churches? Why do you think that is not enough to do it either?
Because existing churches are basically from evangelism, so it's the Christians they haven't really grown, they haven't really learned. It's a pastor, this person who's trained, somebody who's gone to Bible school, is the one who does all the leadership, makes all the decisions.
Mm-hmm.
The members of the church are just there to be told what to do.
Okay, the members are used to being told what to do, not really having the burden and passion within them to go out and initiate church planting movements. So a revival can have a benefit for the people in that church or in that area, but it doesn't spark the growth and the multiplication that Jesus wants in his church. An evangelistic crusade, I think we recognize again that's dependent upon a charismatic speaker, maybe someone with the gift of evangelism, but that will not necessarily spark a church planting movement. Also, even if you have local church planters that have been trained, if the multiplication of the church is dependent, again, upon certain set individuals who know how to do this, we've automatically slowed down the growth of the church. So you don't get this spontaneous movement that we really need to see if we're ever going to complete the Great Commission. Emmanuel.
A church planting movement is not an end in itself. Our purpose is that the name of the Lord Jesus Christ will be honored and glorified among the nations. Church planting movements seem to hold the greatest potential for the largest number of lost individuals to glorify God by coming to new life in Christ. Seed babies hold the Great Commission.
When I first came to Kenya in 2015, Kitty and I had attended a conference that was about missions. It was not about house churches. It wasn't about a church planting movement. But one of the speakers was giving statistics on why, if we continue doing church the way we're doing it, we will never complete the Great Commission. And so we're going to switch right now to an article called Babies Halt the Great Commission and see if we can pick up a few concepts of why that's true. Alice, why don't you start reading where it says over the past century?
Over the past century, the good news has taken off faster than at any other time in history. It took nearly 2,000 years for the gospel.
Just a second, I'm trying to enlarge it a little bit. Okay.
Over the past century, the good news has taken off faster than at any other time in history. It took nearly 2,000 years for the gospel to spread from the early church to nearly half the world's population. In the 1900s, 45.7% of people everywhere were aware of the gospel, according to the Center for the Study of Global Christianity at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. More than 100 years later, that number has grown to more than 70%.
Okay, Hamza, the next, up to the end where it says work of building disciples.
Okay.
Start with given that number. Given that the number.
Okay, given that the number of mission organizations has grown from that in 1970 to 5,100 in 2015, the whole world should soon hear the good news, right? Not so fast, said the CSDC. By 2050, it predicts only another 2% of the world's population will be evangelized, totaling 72%. I continue.
The last sentence.
The root of the slowdown, babies, revival, religions, and the painstaking work of building disciples.
Okay, so if we look at these numbers, at first it looks really good, like, we've really done a good job. But from here on, the strategies we've used in the past will not work. Because the job that's remaining to be done has to be done in a higher rate than the birth rate among an unreached tribe or among a people group where we're going. Okay, Mary? The evangelism boom?
The evangelism boom of the 20th century came primarily from the work done among African tribal groups that had no ties to the world's major religions. The number of Christians on the continent rose from 7 million in 1900 to 470 million in 2010, according to Pew Research Center. But in the same time span, the number of Muslims in Africa grew from 11 million to 234 million, while the number of those practicing tribal religions shrank from 76% of Africans to 13%.
Keep going.
In other words, most people today who have not heard the gospel already belong to a major religion, says CSGC Director Todd Johnson, and those faiths are growing.
Okay. Sonia, next two.
A recent Pew study found that Muslims have the youngest population, 34% are under 15, compared with 27% of Christians and 20% of Buddhists. They also have the highest fertility rates in the world. Muslim women average 3.1 children, while Christian women average 2.7 children. Those Muslim babies and a solid 77% retention rate are predicted to help Islam overtake Christianity as the world's biggest religion by 2070, according to Pew's The Future of World Religions, Population Growth Projections 2010 to 2050 report.
Okay, so I'm hoping you're beginning to see a picture of the problem that's facing us and why, if we continue the methods we've been using, we will fall behind. We will not be able to keep up with the world's growth rate. I'm going to leave the rest of this for you guys to read tonight, just to review it, but I wanted to just draw your attention to it to see what some of the issues are that we're facing and why it's really important that we learn some different strategies. Okay, so if we're talking about spontaneous church planting movements, is that just a bunch of words? Is it just somebody's great idea? Or is it actually happened, or has it actually happened in some places? So what we want to spend a few minutes now is to look at some areas in the world that have experienced church planting movements, to just see what that looks like and how that's different from what we've been aware of in church growth. Okay, my graph is not showing up. I'm not sure why. We'll have to look at it this way, I guess. Okay. Emmanuel, can you read those figures? I don't know if I can enlarge it with it since it's not full.
Yes.
Okay. So this is in a Latin American people group in the southern part of the country. They can't always name the people groups because of security issues. But what happened between 1989, when they had less than 200 churches, and 1998?
And it rose from 200 to 1,000. Now, 1,200.
Yeah. Have you ever seen that kind of growth? In any churches that you know of, are familiar with? Anybody?
No.
Okay. So, you know, what we're seeing in this is, it's not just somebody's idea or a theory, but it has actually happened. A little bit later, we're going to look into the components. How or why does this happen? But for right now, to examine the fact that it is happening, and it has happened. Now, this is in the same people group, same tribe in Latin America, but the northern part of the country. So what we're looking at is, during that time period, did the same thing happen? Alice, can you read us the differences here?
Between 1989 and 1990. 98. Yeah, 1980. So there is a... I don't think there is any difference between 1988 and 1990.
In the numbers of churches formed?
Less than 200.
It started with less than 200. And by 1998, what had happened?
Rose to less than 200.
It started at less than 200,
Yeah.
but by 1998, it had grown to 1,300.
1,300, yeah.
In roughly a 10-year span of time, over 1,000, about 1,100 churches were formed. Can one person do that?
No.
No. Can even a group of 50 church planters do that? No. So obviously, there's a completely different skill that's used in seeing this happen. Yes, it is the work of God, but God leaves us principles that He wants us to use. And these principles help us be the most effective farmers that we can be. So this is why we want to look at some of these places and areas that church planting movements have happened. Hamza, this switches now to a region in China.
Yeah.
So what is it kind of starting with in 1993?
It starts with 0,
Okay.
then it grows to 600.
Yeah, a little less than 600, probably about 550 in the space of 5 years. So that's roughly 100 new churches a year. Now, does China have the same kind of governments as Latin America do?
No.
No. So it's different kind of government, different location, different culture, different language, but the same principles being experienced. Okay, moving to India. Mary, what do you see there? In 1989, it was roughly what? Trying to see if I can.
Bottom right, there's a little drop.
So what is that, 3 to?
Okay. Yeah, just take a guess at it. It's not exact.
10.
Maybe, can you use that?
Yeah, at
plus?
the bottom
At
of
the
right,
bottom.
where there's a sort of scale just above the time and date.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
It's the same box
Same
I
thing,
have.
actually.
I will say less than 200.
Okay, all right.
And in 1998, 2000.
Okay, so again, different type of government, different culture, different languages, but the same principles, this exponential growth of the church. Okay, now to Cambodia. Sonia.
It started out flat in 1992, but the graph steadily rose up to 1998 to 200, almost 190 house churches.
Okay. The Khmer of Cambodia were still recovering from a terrible genocidal war, but even in the midst of that, those terrible circumstances, the church was growing quite rapidly. Again, different language, different cultures. So, just from what you've heard so far, what are you thinking as you look around maybe Kitale or maybe Nairobi or towns, maybe Kampala, towns or cities that you know of, and compare what you see of church planting in those areas to this? What are you thinking? What captures your attention?
I'll use the example of there were two churches in Dar es Salaam. One was called Vineyard, and there was a leader. It was a small church, but relatively well. He left, went back to the US. By that time I'd left. But I remember just before I left, a whole bunch of people who left. And when he left, a local pastor came in. And it almost collapsed. Like there were fewer than 5 people from, I think it was about 60 people in the church. And then same to a different church, when the leader I guess the trend is when the leader leaves, it all but collapses. Which means the leader is the central point of that church. So without him, no one
Yeah,
can take his place.
That's a really interesting observation. Has anybody else ever seen that happen? Where a very popular pastor leaves and then the church kind of implodes. So then you have to ask yourself the question, was the church based on Jesus Christ? Or was it based on the personality or gifting set of a particular individual? And anytime we build the church onto an individual, we're in trouble. We're in very big trouble. A little bit later, we're going to look at just that dynamic. What is that? Why does that happen? Anybody else? What strikes you when you look at some of these figures?
I think that something is not done as it was used to be done with the rising figures of churches, because I would really like to see a graph for the church in the areas that you've mentioned, Kitale, Nairobi, and maybe you see that the graph might probably have started higher and then it's rapidly coming down.
Okay, that's another good observation. And I think a little bit later this week when we start the Firm Foundations class, we're actually going to be looking at some of the statistics for Kenya. How many churches are in these different areas, and are they multiplying or not? But when you see graphs like this, even without doing a serious research project yet in our own areas, can we see the disconnect? That this is not what we're seeing. Any other observations? Mary, what do you think about this from an American perspective? let me rephrase that.
Yes.
If you think about the church that you attended
Mhm.
last in the States, and it was a mega church,
Mhm.
how did that church grow, and did that church plant other churches that could, duplicate this kind of growth?
So, as far as church growth, what I observed was word of mouth. There's a good preacher here, come check it out. They have a lot of programs here, come check this place out, is how I think growth occurred. As far as planning other churches, no, it was pretty much, let's take care of our congregation and our people who have come into our building. Make sure that things are okay with them and that kind of thing.
Okay, so we certainly have seen the growth of megachurches, both in Africa and Europe and the States. But these megachurches do not expand the geography. And what I mean by that is the church that Mary is mentioning impacts a certain community right around that building. A few blocks, few miles radius around that building. But its impact doesn't go any further than that. People are generally not going to drive 2 hours to come to a church, even if it does have a good preacher. And so the sphere of influence beyond the geography around that building gets less and less the further out you get from the building. But when you multiply many churches rapidly, your influence is greatly expanded, because now you truly are able to impact many more people than you can even with a megachurch, as far as the reach or the spread of that church. And even if you have, most big churches have some kind of multimedia presentation, TV or radio programs, but those do not plant churches. And churches are the way that God ordained for us to be discipled. So as we move forward in this, we're going to be looking at some of the dynamics that spark these kind of movements. You have a question?
More an observation. I realized that initially when these churches started, people have gone out, they want to share the word. But when the churches grow, they become more selfish. This is our church, and if you go out to a different church and you are seen in this church, what are you doing there? So we want to keep our flock. We don't want to let them go. And if you do that, you're seen as you betrayed the church.
Yeah, I think all of us have probably seen that dynamic in places we've been. Okay, we're going to just take a short stretch break right now, and we'll come back in 10 minutes and continue on.